Joining us now is Matt Duss. He's a senior policy analyst at the Center for American Progress. Matt, how are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Very good to have you on. Let's obviously everything in Iraq is very fast moving. There's a lot to keep track of, many pieces in play. But let's work it backwards a little bit. President Obama had a statement on Friday where he kind of outlined the situation pretty well and gave some certain possible inclinations of what he might do. But really, with the exception of clearly ruling out ground troops, it wasn't necessarily clear, at least for me, what the plan was. This morning, Secretary of State Kerry suggested, two interesting things. I mean, one, and I think it's a formalizing of the obvious, which is that we will at least be informally coordinating with Iran somewhat in Iraq because we both have concerns about the same group. And then he also held out the possibility of using drone strikes as part of a military response to the situation. So maybe if you could tease out what Kerry said, and we could start to kind of work it backwards from there and get a sense of what's going on and what maybe the best policy paths are.
Sure. I mean, well, what Kerry said was just very basically that the United States is open to just talking with Iran over what's happening in Iraq. Iran as a neighbor and as someone, a country that enjoys significant influence in Iraq and has done so since the moment the United States toppled that government.
Yep.
Has its own interest. First of all, I mean, I think Iran's key interest in Iraq has always been just that Iraq not pose a threat to the security of Iran. It's very easy to understand why Iran and Iraq fought a hugely destructive 8-year war in the 1980s. A great deal of Iran's security policy was directed at preventing that threat from reemerging. And then, of course, you have the government that was installed by the United States is a Shia majority government, and its key leaders are longtime partners and clients and friends of Iran, and in many cases, as with Nouri al-Maliki, the current prime minister, but with many other members of the government, actually had refuge in Iran during the Saddam era.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, no. So it kind of stands to reason that I think we can overstate the extent to which the United States and Iran have common interest in Iraq. It's certainly possible to do that, but at the very basic level, I think Iran and the United States both have an interest in Iraq that is not in complete collapse and is not a safe haven for terrorists such as ISIS or Al Qaeda who could pose a threat to Iran.
Absolutely. So let's get a little bit more into the specifics of who. I think people have some sense of what ISIS is. What, though, is the success they've been having? How broad a reflection, if we're going to disaggregate some things? So there's their drive, their success as an organization in terms of how they're kind of getting funding, how they're funding themselves, how they're able to kind of acquire the territory they've been acquiring. How much does that owe to them as a very effective organization, which obviously they do seem to have a certain real degree of effectiveness, obviously. How much of that reflects them, and then how much is this a kind of just broader reflection of Sunni discontent and anger at the Maliki government and basically being repressed in the new Iraq?
Yeah. Well, no, I think it's certainly both. I mean, it's hard to say exactly how much of one versus how much of the other, but I mean, let's just, recognize that, you had a situation that was created by the United States when we went in, toppled the government, empowered the Shia majority, which has ruled in Iraq in a way that, that is not very inclusive. You've had the Sunnis in Iraq after having oppressed the Shia and Kurdish, majorities over the past decades, was now, facing some payback. And then we had this situation of a sectarian civil war, insurgency, whatever word you want to use, where you had a lot of these foreign fighters coming in from surrounding countries and essentially going to insurgent boot camp in Iraq, which the United States had created by going in there in the first place. So you'd have this phenomenon of foreign fighters, and these guys have formed essentially the core of ISIS, and they've gotten even more training and more experience and gathered more followers and more recruits over the last several years in Syria, and have turned themselves into a fairly effective insurgent force. And they've been able to kind of take that and parlay that and exploit the continuing disaffection and sense of grievance that many Sunnis in Iraq feel toward the government.
So where does that go from in terms of that Sunni dynamic? Does that end there in a certain sense? And so if we took a place that's been overrun by ISIS, does the support that they received from Sunnis in the local population, that's a byproduct of what we just discussed in terms of the treatment of the Shia-led government and the dissatisfaction with the payback that they're on the receiving end of, does that mean that within the next couple of weeks or months there's a dissatisfaction with what ISIS is attempting to do in terms of implementing an incredibly sort of draconian form of Islamic governance? Did the splits then reemerge? So, okay, we're Sunnis together to protect ourselves from Shia, but now we're Sunnis and maybe we're moderate Sunnis, or maybe we're residual Baathists. Maybe, did those kind of internal divisions start to emerge as well?
No, I think that's a great question, and I think the answer is most likely yes. I mean, this is the dynamic that we saw, during the Iraq Civil War, is that you had these foreign fighters, these very extreme elements of al-Qaeda-oriented sort of global jihad fighters led by Zarqawi, who came in and allied with former Ba'athists and formed the insurgency, but then, the al-Qaeda types just were so extreme that they managed to alienate their erstwhile allies. So I think we have a situation here where you have these Sunnis who are kind of willing to, if not actively, then at least passively, accept, this ISIS force. But I think, these guys are coming in and, forcing women to, wear, complete, total body covering, no smoking, no alcohol, just, no fun whatsoever. So I think, I would predict that you're going to see some of these tensions reemerging. You would have hoped, or you would have thought that these guys would learn how not to alienate the local population as much. But just from what I've seen over the past few days with how they're immediately establishing the most extreme interpretation of Islamic law in these places they take over, I think we're going to see some real tension emerge.
Well, I mean, right. It's kind of core to their brand. It's like asking Coke to open a new market without soft drinks. I mean, not to be glib about it, but that's what they do. So that, and I think that the one kind of final piece of sort of table setting or history or context here that, and obviously this is not a yes or no answer, but it does seem to play, there is a debate going on of relitigating previous Iraq policy that is relevant to the extent that it has bearing on what we do today and tomorrow and into the future. Mm-hmm. So, it seemed like with the surge, which was advocated obviously on the right, with the Sunni awakening, which I think has broader kind of political buy-in, it seemed like a lot of people sort of got the basic concept of essentially recognizing that we need to build coalitions with local leadership and local tribes and kind of get buy-in. That seems pretty obvious. And then we left. Basically, Obama implemented an agreement which was already basically actually established under the very end of the Bush administration, as you know. And and then we left this pretty repressive Shia government in place with a close relationship with Iran, and that was certainly pretty ironic and not helpful for a lot of Iraqis, and not particularly helpful for the region. But it seemed like we kind of left a patchwork together, and it was low grade, consistently bad, and now it's sort of exploded. So to the extent that those previous policies and the withdrawal play a role, or is it a byproduct of Syria? I mean, I think having a sense of where we put the attention on what has really precipitated the escalation of this crisis might give us some sense of what the smart thing to do now is.
Well, I think it's right to go back and look at the surge. Okay, I mean the argument behind the surge was twofold. First, you would you would amp up the number of U.S. troops there. They would increase security. They eventually would work with some of these tribal leaders who would no longer fight for the insurgency, but would instead fight against the insurgency and help contribute to the increased security. But the second part of that was, once you have increased security, the theory was that you would create political space for to start a reconciliation between Iraq's various political communities. You would consolidate the government. You would get some real buy-in from all these various constituencies, and that just never happened. And I think what we've seen is that it's very difficult for any country, even one as powerful as the United States, to force governments to act inclusively if they really just don't want to. So I think we still have that problem. I mean, we can talk and discuss and debate about the extent to which Iraq falling apart really does impact U.S. security interests, but we're still faced with this partner government led by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki that has shown no inclination to govern to do any real power sharing, to take steps that would increase inclusiveness, that would address some of the very real and legitimate grievances of the Sunni minority in Iraq. So we're still kind of stuck.
Yeah, and I think actually that is another important question to kind of get out there. What if we stripped away the hyperbole, but we also stripped away maybe some of the kind of cavalier minimization of the issue? I mean, what are the security stakes for the United States or Europe? Is there a sort of objective assessment of that?
Well, I think the theory is, and I think there's something to this. I mean, anytime you don't want big or terrorist organizations to have, to control pieces of territory they can use for training, planning, etc. I think that's just a bad thing.
Right.
I mean, I think, it's always a question of, okay, where do they actually have bases, and what is the extent to which that actually is a danger? What is this group about? Do they have aspirations to attack the United States? But I think we do have an interest, in stability in the region. We have an interest in lots of people not being killed. That is happening right now.
Right.
We have an interest in people believing that the United States will kind of follow through on our commitments. Speaking just kind of, speaking here from a sort of moral standpoint, I do think the United States does have something of a debt to Iraq here. I think we can, I think good progressives can disagree about, what our tools are, what the, how we can go about sort of satisfying this. But, we went in there, we removed the government, we essentially ran an occupation that saw the state almost completely collapse. And they're still dealing with the fallout from that. Now, a lot of these problems are ones that they have made for themselves. As I said, Nouri al-Maliki and his government has not governed in a very responsible, legitimate, or inclusive way. Right. So it's not that this is all on the U.S., but I think there's no question that we do have, we have incurred a responsibility to kind of get hands on deck here and try to handle this. That's not to say we should reinvade or do airstrikes or what have you. It's not to say that we necessarily shouldn't do any of those things, although I think I'm against sending troops there. I'm open to the idea that some limited strikes could make a difference, although I'm very, very skeptical. But still, at the end of the day, we have this central problem of this is a government that's not shown any willingness to govern responsibly.
Yeah, let's get more to that in the second, because that does, those are sort of the core questions from a U.S. policy point of view. I think the last thing I want to introduce in the conversation is it does seem like the Kurds have, if anybody has benefited from this situation pretty consistently, it has been the Kurdish community in Iraq, and Kurdish governance seems relatively effective, certainly compared to the rest of the country. So I guess both on a level of what is their role in blocking the encroachment of ISIS and these forces, and I guess more broadly, is this, with all of these factors in play and the place kind of coming apart and Kurdistan being a place that sort of works, is this a time when they actually just sort of formally break off, or do they even want to do that? Because frankly, things seem to be working fairly well for them. So why kind of unnecessarily agitate a situation by formalizing something that is kind of operating informally anyways.
Right. No, I think that's pretty much the thinking, as I gather it, is that they are essentially independent. They have, they have their own territory. They run their own foreign policy. They have their own embassy, for example, here in the United States. That it functions as, the Kurdish embassy. But, why exacerbate the situation needlessly by going that extra step? That's not to say they won't in the future. I think at some point they probably will. But let's also remember that the Kurds had a bit of a head start. They had, a relatively safe zone in northern Iraq for a few years, before the U.S. invasion. And they, but you really have to recognize that they have, even though they have their own internal differences, they have been able to sort of pull together and create, an effectively independent Kurdistan in northern Iraq.
So, moving towards what should or shouldn't be done, I mean, it seems like, and President Obama, he whatever you think of his various, policy successes or failings, or a kind of full assessment of his record. He knows how to kind of analytically lay things out, and it seemed like he basically said the prime takeaway, I think, on Friday was, look, I'm not going to rule anything out, but and I do mean look, because that's obviously how President Obama likes to start a lot of his sentences. So I got look, and but that there is the possibility of action, and then there's the reality that you've continued to go back to that, okay, so in effect, Prop Maliki and all of these problems are going to stay in place. And it seems like everything has just kind of turned into, to an extent, and I think it's a valuable thing and worthwhile thing to do. I'll do some more of it later on the show, but the left is kind of reminding everybody of who created and generated this mess and this catastrophe to begin with. And now the right is kind of all reemerged to sort of do the whole, chest beating, and Obama's going to look like he wants to ride a pony and we're not going to be safe and blah, 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 blah. But where in this is the actual solution to this, which is, as you say, you can't force conclusive governance, and that seems to be the clearest solution. I mean, is that just the one thing that might actually do this here is what's unavailable? And then in that context, what would cause the least minimum harm, basically?
Right. Well, no, I mean, first on, the people who got us in there, I think it's fine and important to remember who said what, especially with some of the most, brazen and sort of macho, aggressive proponents of the Iraq War, like, John McCain, Bill Kristol, all these guys who made these very wild claims that just didn't pan out. But I think what's even more important is remembering those claims and those theories about the way the world works, about the way that American power works, and about the capacity of American military power to create certain outcomes. I think what's most important is to remember why those theories turned out not to be true. Fine. If people say, let's not play the blame game. Oh, I think we can play the blame game and talk about what we should do at the same time. We're smart, intelligent people. We can do all of these things. But getting to what Obama should do, again, there are a number of questions that I think have yet to be really answered. What tools does the U.S. have at its disposal? We have a lot of tools, military, diplomatic, economic, and otherwise. What can each of these tools do to actually change the situation on the ground? At what cost? And then what are steps, B, C, D, and E? I think he's very smart to kind of try and think through that.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, does that just sort of mean that we are actually quite literally, I mean, at least from a military perspective of a military option, we should really, I mean, at the very least be waiting and really assessing, not kind of just jumping in because, oh, there's this horrible situation and we need to go in and do something now. We need to think somewhat more contextually, and that means doing things like having some talks with Iran, talking with other regional stakeholders. I mean, as a kind of final point, as we get towards wrapping up, I'd also, what's the role of our relationship with Saudi Arabia, as an example, and even at least
it's really good. Yeah. Right.
Go ahead.
No, it's really important to get to that, and I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to bring it up as well. I mean, it is good to understand that what is happening, as with Syria and now in Iraq, and this is true even, of what was happening in Iraq during the U.S. occupation, is that it is a proxy war, a part of a proxy Cold War, whatever term you want to use, between Iran and states like Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Gulf states. So that we see that playing out, but it's also a sort of it highlights tensions within the Sunni camp as well, between very, very hardcore extremists like ISIS, like Al Qaeda, between less extreme Sunni Muslims. But then you have there was a report the other day that even if it's not the governments of countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others supporting these extremists, that you do have private individuals, very wealthy individuals in these countries, who have been sending money and supporting, these extreme insurgent groups.
It would almost be like, just to give an analogy, if the Koch brothers or somebody like that, that they're just the first ones that come to mind. I'm not trying to sort of besmirch them, but if they had a direct, maybe I am, if they had a direct business relationship with the Zeta drug cartel in Mexico, and they directly sent them a significant amount of money, that is not U.S. foreign policy, but it's still a significant amount of resources coming from powerful, well-connected people in the United States. And that's the type of thing coming out of the Gulf, even if it isn't necessarily from governments.
Right. And so it's on, the responsibility, I think, is on those governments to try and control that.
Yeah.
So the question is, to what extent are they sort of getting a wink from these governments?
Well, absolutely. So I guess it's just many questions to answer and many things to figure out as this crisis kind of rolls on. But I appreciate your time very much, Matt Duss, and I appreciate helping us get sort of bigger context and framework for sort of understanding, or doing our best to have some sense of what's going on there.
All right. Happy to. Thanks.
Thank you so much.